Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is One Piece, Arabasta Saga, Whiskey Peak Arc, Episode 64, A Pirate-Loving Town, Arrival at Whiskey Peak. The episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So basically, in this episode, they've left Laboon and the lighthouses and are heading towards the first island to drop off Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine as they've agreed. And the weather starts to behave terribly. It starts with some snow before Nami then realizes that they're going in the wrong direction because the boat turned itself around while she wasn't paying attention. And then they end up with a spring gale, and then they end up with a storm of winds, lightning shooting down, tons of high waves. They come across an iceberg, and they basically run the gamut, and everybody has to pitch in except Zoro, who's sleeping. After Zoro wakes up, he goes over to Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine and is like, your names are ringing some bells, but before he can actually put it all together, Nami hits him on the head, and they then arrive at the island where Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine jump off the ship in order to swim ahead to the island, and the rest of the crew show up there. Nami also informs everybody that they have to wait for the log pose to set to the next island, which we had learned in the previous episode from Crocus. So, as they arrive, obviously there's a bunch of people there, and at first they're nervous, but then all of a sudden all the people start, you know, celebrating and are like, we are a town that loves celebrating things, and you pirates arriving have given us yet another reason to celebrate, and we've had a great harvest. Let's throw you a party. And of course, the crew lets their guards down for the most part. Most of them do. And Sanji wines and dines with girls. Usopp tells his adventures to a rapt audience. Luffy eats them out of house and home, and then both Nami and Zoro drink and win a toasting competition before passing out. We then have, after this party and everyone's asleep, Mr. 8 and Miss Monday coming out and meeting Miss Wednesday and Mr. 9, who had been out of the town sending a message to the leader of their organization about their failed mission, but successfully luring the Straw Hats. And then we have them basically plotting out the demise of the Straw Hats, only to be caught by Zoro, who was pretending to be passed out. And then Zoro, after revealing himself, confronts the 100 bounty hunters there and names them as Baroque Works, the organization. And when everyone's surprised, how do you know who we are? He's like, you guys tried to recruit me back when I was a bounty hunter, so I rejected you, but I think I can handle all 100 of you. And that's where the episode ends. So now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, we'll rank the episode. As always, we'll start with the mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So we start with our single arc supporting character introduction, and this is Miss Monday. She only appears here on Whiskey Peak in this little 4-episode arc and isn't the main character of the arc. So she's worth 1 point. We then have our multi-arc supporting character introduction, and that is Mr. 8, or as we will soon learn in the future, spoilers, Igorem, who is present in this arc and then kind of a supporting character in a couple of other arcs as well, and flashbacks and the like. So he's worth 3 points, bringing us to 4 points already. Then we have our impactful or memorable moment line, etc. And for me, one of the images that sticks in my mind from the series is on Whiskey Peak, how as they're coming up to the island, it's assumed that there's like giant cactuses in the background. However, at this episode, when it's nighttime, we get a zoomed in look, and it turns out that all of the hills of the area are covered in tomb crosses, and it's those crosses that look like spikes from a distance and make them look like cacti when really they're not cacti, they are hills filled with graves, showing that Whiskey Peak has been in business for a long time and quite successful in their pirate hunting endeavors. Um, but I think the visual of it is very stunning, and because it's such a stunning visual, it does tend to stick with you. So that adds another 3 points, which brings us to 7. And then last but not least, we do have our world building pieces, and that is the introduction of Baroque Works as an organization being introduced into the series. We first see when they leave a message for the unluckies, the Baroque symbol on the mailbox, and that's Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine. And then, of course, Zorro calls them out by name as Baroque Works, who previously tried to recruit him. And that brings us all the way up to 11 points out of 10. However, there is the negative messaging or behavior, and that, of course, is the overall trickery of Baroque Works. You know, they are bounty hunters, and bounty hunters are not illegal, so Baroque Works is a criminal organization, but the actual bounty hunting aspect is legal, so that's not negative. However, how they're going about it by tricking people, manipulating them into letting their guard down, and then sneak attacking once they are vulnerable instead of just straight up, honorably fighting them face to face, is, in my opinion, negative. Because, you know, if you are both capable of fighting, then you should fight fair and square. And I know, like, this is not the show necessarily for that, because you've got pirates, which traditionally are evil, bounty hunters, which are out to kill and just get the bounty no matter what. But I still think, given that it is a show for children, um, the honor of a face-to-face match up front is preferable to this manipulation and trickery, though it does lead to the somewhat comedic scenes of all of the crew kind of losing themselves in the partying ahead of time before everything is revealed. I don't even know what I'm saying there, but anyways, the trickery is a bad thing, in my opinion, and according to my bias and judgment, which can apply on the mostly objective ranking, that's why it's mostly objective. So -2 points for that, making this a 9 out of 10. And it's the only episode in this arc so far, so we have in first a pirate-loving town, arrival at Whiskey Peak. So now we come to my personal ranking, and I will be completely honest, I'm not overly fond of the setting for this particular arc. I prefer more lush environments or even cold environments. I'm not really a fan of all the beige and like the hard pack kind of rock, but over mostly barren landscape. I did like how the giant cacti actually weren't cacti, but had the tombstone crosses on them to look like spikes from a distance. But ultimately, the style of the buildings, the setting itself, isn't my favorite. I'm not a huge desert person, whether that's a loose sand desert or like a rocky desert. It's just not necessarily for me. Um, Hot environments, honestly, are my worst nightmare because heat equals sweat equals body odor equals while you're nose blind to your own odor, you are not nose blind to other people's odors, and I happen to be very scent sensitive, and therefore that is among my greatest nightmares. So when I see environments like that, even if it's like through a screen and I know I'm not going to be smelling anything, I just automatically have a bit of a turn off to them. So Whiskey Peak, not my favorite setting. Um, I did enjoy the, montage of the crazy weather, though I also feel like they could have gone harder on that and maybe rather than like the overlay images, just had like quick changes of the weather, which I think they do in the future, or maybe they don't. I can't remember 100%. But I do like that they are learning more about the sea, and Nami is coming to understand how the Grand Line is different, which it's good that she's coming to this realization sooner rather than later, because obviously, as the navigator, everybody's lives are in her hands. As for the Zoro sleeping through it all, that was amusing to me. Even like Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine being put to work because at first they're huddled in the kitchen being like, "Don't you have heating?" and complaining, and then Nami's like, "You're not guests. Get out there and work." And then, she makes them help, which I also found was an amusing moment. The partying, each of the crew members had a activity that was associated to their character or connected to their character well. For example, um, Sanji, surrounded by women because he's weak to women. Usopp, a crowd of adoring listeners because he likes to tell his stories. Luffy, plate after plate after plate of food because he likes to eat. Zoro and Nami are, well, Zoro is a drinker, so, he takes part in the drinking competition because he's just a drinker. In the future, he says something along the lines of why he's not a hero, and it has to do with booze. So I'm not gonna say the line because I'll get to it when I get to that episode. But anyways, the point is he's a drinker, so him being part of that competition makes sense. And then it is a competition with prize money, 100,000 berry, and so of course Nami takes part and wins it because she'll do anything for money. So I like how it's all catered to each person individually and how they managed to do that with seemingly having met these people for the first time. Obviously the author knows what their characters are, but surprising that this town of people know exactly what each person is going to respond to. And to be fair, they could have gotten inside intel from Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine. However, it is implied in this episode that they went up a hill to write a letter off to the Unluckies and their leader, Mr. Zero, while this party was going on, and that they were meeting up for the first time at the end of the party once everybody had passed out to plot the demise of the people inside. So I don't know that they actually would have met off screen to pass on the information of how to get these people. But then, in theory, if they've done this multiple times, maybe they just have all the scenarios ready for all the character types and they just naturally fell into whichever one suited them. That's also a possibility. But that's why I didn't take points for continuity error because it didn't make sense. But also at the same time, I did find that that's a little bit too convenient that they just happen to have a perfectly catered activity to each individual character's vice or main trait, which kind of took it away. And then, of course, we're basically setting up for Zoro's fight at the end of the episode, but the fight isn't beginning. So it's like, you've caught my interest, but the follow through's still coming. So overall, I felt the entertainment value overall was a little bit lacking. I wasn't overly fond of the setting. I did find that there was amusement in the various activities that took place in the episode, but it was still minor amusement. It wasn't like make me laugh out loud and even chuckle levels of amusement. It was just kind of like an internal, I am amused feeling. Um, Maybe a smile, but no verbalization of joy. And then there is that slight continuity of how do they manage to cater to each person. So specifically when they've just seemingly met them for the first time and had very minimal conversation. But I do also value the information that we're getting about Baroque Works and introducing that organization in, and how it's introduced in a relatively natural way with Zoro revealing, yep, I was recruited in the past when I was a bounty hunter, because he started as a bounty hunter, and that's how he put two and two together. So overall, there were pros, there were cons, and my personal pros and cons are different from the mostly objective, and I did decide to give this episode just a 4 because, like I said, not my favorite setting, not a lot. I value the you know what? I'm just going to keep repeating myself. So rather than cycling through again, 4 out of 10 is the final score for this episode, and that puts A Pirate Loving Town, Arrival at Whiskey Peak in first place for now. That now brings us to the saga ranking so far, and this, of course, is where we'll be ranking each of the arcs within this saga against each other. And we start with our Reverse Mountain arc that has been completed, and on our mostly objective ranking, it completed at 90%. And now Whiskey Peak arc starts with 9 out of a possible 40. On the personal ranking side, similarly, the Reverse Mountain arc ended with 90%. However, the Whiskey Peak arc is at a 4 out of a possible 40 so far. Bringing us now to our series ranking so far, which is where we will be ranking each of the sagas against each other. And East Blue Saga ended on the mostly objective ranking with 56.25%, and the Arabasta Saga so far has a 9 out of a possible 70. Then we have the East Blue Saga's personal ranking ending with 52.5, and Arabasta Saga so far has also a 9 out of 70. But with that, we've now rewatched and ranked One Piece, Arabasta Saga, Whiskey Peak Arc, Episode 64, A Pirate Loving Town, Arrival at Whiskey Peak. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.